Okay, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is a presentation which I gave in 2012, as is noted here on the first slide. The title is Meiji Japan Through the Eyes of Ernest Satow. It was given to the Japan Association of International Relations, Nihon Kokusai Seiji Gakkai, at the Nagoya Congress Center on October the 21st, 2012. Okay, and there is Satow on the left side as he appeared, well, in Paris, I think that was, yes. Okay. Okay, Satow's A Diplomat in Japan. Satow is best known in Japan for his book, A Diplomat in Japan, which describes the period 1862 to 1869, the final years of the Tokugawa shogunate, or bakumatsu in Japanese. It's been translated into Japanese and it's frequently quoted and used in academic and non-academic works. It's based on his journals, which are his diaries, and his memory. There is tremendous detail and perceptive insights into the unstable and fluctuating political situation from a uniquely placed insider working as student interpreter and interpreter at the British legation. He started the book in Bangkok in the period of 1884 to 7, when he was there. He completed it in retirement at Ottery St. Mary in Devon, England, at the urging of younger relations. It was first published in 1921, and it's been reprinted many times as a bestseller. The journals, what we might call in German Urtext, the original text, are in the National Archives of the UK. By the way, these orange pieces of text lead to hyperlinks. They are hyperlinks on the web. However, we can't really go into that in this video. So anyway, the journals are in the National Archives of the UK, deposited there at Satow's request, and I was at the time transcribing and annotating them with Professor Robert Morton of Chuo University for publication. These have subsequently been published. It is interesting to compare the original diaries and A Diplomat in Japan, which is in some ways a sanitized version with extra commentary added and some parts omitted. Okay, this is Satow as he appears, drawn by Charles Wergman in the Japan Punch in June 1868. He's very thin, and well, he was thin, but not this thin, I don't think. But anyway, it's quite amusing drawings. The center of our policy in Japan returns from Yedo, that's Tokyo, and goes to Yedo. I think Wergman didn't really tire of drawing people like Satow. Gave him hours of amusement, and also he edited the Japan Punch. Okay, so Satow in Japan from 1870 to 1882. Satow was promoted from student interpreter to interpreter on April the 1st, 1865, and to Japanese secretary on January the 1st, 1868. He was given the local rank of second secretary at Yedo, Tokyo, on July the 30th, 1876. This is from the Foreign Office lists. Satow returned to Japan from England in November 1870. He was on home leave from February 1875 to January 1877. He enjoyed his time in England with family and friends, and he also toured Europe, especially Germany, France, Italy. In 1875, he enrolled at Lincoln's Inn to qualify as a barrister and helped Robert Kenway Douglas to catalogue Japanese books at the British Museum. And he spent 3 months in Switzerland and Italy from July to November. He visited San Remo with his sister Augusta Toza from December the 13th to January 6th, 1876. In 1876, his leave was extended for health reasons. He visited Paris from April the 13th to the 24th. He attended lectures in Roman law at Marburg University in Germany from May to August. Then he had 2 more weeks in Paris in September and left London for Japan via Italy in November. So he had plenty of chances to travel around during his leave, not just in Britain. I'm rather envious, actually. Whom did Satow meet in Japan in the 1870s and early 1880s? During his second period in Japan, Satow met various important Japanese, including Saigo Takamori, Iwakura Tomomi, Katsukaishu, Ito Hirobumi, Okubo Toshimichi, Kido Takayoshi, Terashima Munenori, Prince and Princess Higashi Fushimi, and others. These contacts are recorded in his diaries, which I have transcribed and annotated from the Satow papers held at the UK National Archives as A Diplomat in Japan Part 2, the Diaries of Ernest Satow, 1870 to 1883. And 1871 to 1874, Travels and Travails in Japan. In 1871, August, he guides the former Austrian diplomat Baron Hübner to Hakone, Atami, and Enoshima. In October and November, he meets Iwakura Tomomi, and the Iwakura mission leaves Japan for the United States and Europe on December 23rd. This is a woodcut of a feast at the woodcut print of a feast at the house of the foreign minister Sawa Nobuyoshi, recorded in Satow's diary on the 8th of September 1871. And it includes Satow, Hübner, and Adams, Francis Otwell Adams here, these 3 here. And I think that maybe Sawa is here. I'm not quite sure which one he is, but anyway, this is at his house with all these musicians and so on. And Baron Hübner and Satow visit a Japanese home. This is drawn by Hübner and published in Hübner's work Ein Spaziergang die Welt, kind of a what could you say? A walk through the world, a walk around the world, but or an excursion. Excursion is a better word, I think, around the world. So he was a globetrotter, was the word used in English. And here's Francis Otwell Adams, 1872. In late January, Satow travels with the acting chargé d'affaires Francis Otwell Adams on the Koshu Kaido to the base of Mount Fuji. In late March, he goes to Nikko with Adams and Charles Wergman of the Japan Punch. I've done a separate video of Satow and Nikko, by the way. At the end of November, Satow accompanies Okuma Shigenobu and Yamao Yozo by boat from Yokohama to Nagasaki via the inland sea, the Seto Naikai, to inspect lighthouses, and he returns to Tokyo from Kyoto via the Nakasendo. The lighthouses were British designed by Richard Henry Brunton. The modern ones were built in this period. In 1873, in mid-April, Satow goes with Judge and Mrs. Nicholas John Hannon via Chichibu Kaido to Ome and Ogawa. He returns via the Koshu Kaido, and in late October, he travels to Oyama. In 1874, Satow's father dies in Sidmouth, that's on the south coast of England, on April the 2nd. He applies for home leave, and from September to October, he visits Nikko. Again, I've talked about that separately. He leaves Japan for his second home leave at the beginning of February 1875. And then back in Japan after home leave from 1877 to 1882. In 1877, Satow reaches Nagasaki on January the 28th. He observes the situation in Kagoshima just before the Satsuma Rebellion. And Saigo visits Willis's house on February the 11th. Satow reaches Yokohama on March the 7th, and he visits Katsukaishu on March the 31st. He'd already had some dealings with Katsukaishu back in at the end of the shogunate, when negotiations went on between Saigo Takamori and Katsukaishu about Edo and whether it could be saved from being burnt down. So he knew Katsukaishu anyway quite well. Sato at that time was an intermediary between Katsu and Saigo. Saigo then was representing the government. Was representing, yes, the imperial forces, which became the government. In late July, he climbs Mount Fuji with Dickens. In September and October, he visits mountains in North Kanto region with Dickens. And then in 1878, on February the 10th, he visits Yokosuka and Uraga with Dickens. And on March the 4th to 17th, they visit the island of Hachijo. In July to August, Sato and Lieutenant Albert George Sidney Hawes visit the mountains in Etchu, which is Toyama in modern name, and Hida, North Gifu. In November, Sato is sent to Jeju Island and Busan by Sir Harry Parkes to reconnoiter, to find out what was going on in Korea and what it was like. And this is the only time, by the way, that Sato visited Korea. And there's Sir Harry Parkes on the left, his rather tough and severe boss, and William Willis, his friend, also, Dr. William Willis. Okay, 1877 to 82 continued. In 1879, from May to June, Sato travels from the Yamato area, which is Nara, Yoshino, Kumano, Koyasan, via the Tokaido highway back to Tokyo. In October, he goes to Shimofusa and Kazusa in Chiba. From mid-November, he travels in the Kansai area, returning to Tokyo via Nagano and Yamanashi in the new year. In 1880, Sato's first son, Eitaro, is born, and although it's not actually noted in the diaries, he goes on various trips to Omuro in Maebashi to inspect tumuli, which is kofun. He goes to Kamakura, Odawara, Hakone in March, Nagano and Niigata in June, and Nikko in September to October, and the Boso Peninsula in Chiba in December. And he meets Asano, his real name is Lee Tong-in, who becomes a British agent in Korea. So he's a Korean. Asano was a Japanese name he was given. In 1881, in January, Sato traveled to Kisaraza in Chiba. In March, Sato and Hawes' book, the handbook for travelers in central and northern Japan, is published. From July to August, he travels in the Akaishi Mountains, that's the Southern Alps, returning via Hakone to Tokyo, and the travel diary tells us more about that. In November, he escorted the British princes Albert and George to Kansai. He bought books at a bookshop called Zeniya in Kyoto on November the 12th. In 1882, Sato becomes a member of the Secretariat for the Treaty Revision Conference at the Japanese Foreign Office from January to July. He travels to Atami and Izu Peninsula in February, March, and Chichibu, Kofu, and Hakone in May, Ise, Nagoya, Hakone, Fuji in August to September, and Northwest Kanto, Kusatsu, and Mount Shirone in November. John Harrington Gubbins arrives to relieve Sato in December. And on December 31st, Sato sails from Yokohama via Kobe and Nagasaki for England after 20 years in Japan, excluding the home leaves. And as for his honors, he was made a CMG, Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, in August 1883. He was made a Knight of the same order in 1895 and a Knight Grand Cross of St. Michael and St. George in 1902. This is all from the Foreign Office lists. Okay, so the British legation in Tokyo, this is what it looked like. And it's from Baroness Daneton's 14 years of diplomatic life in Japan. Okay. And in 1895 to 1900, Satow returned to Japan. He was in Japan for that period. And this is all abstracted from Satow's diaries. In 1895, which is Meiji Emperor, the year of Meiji Emperor, 28th year, Satow in Tangier learns that the Japanese government, he was in Morocco, so he learned that the Japanese government has accepted his appointment as envoy extraordinary and minister plenipotentiary, and is ordered home. He's ordered home by telegram on the 17th of May. He reaches London on the 27th, and he goes to the Foreign Office and discusses the Far East with the permanent Undersecretary, Sir Thomas Sanderson, the Foreign Secretary, Lord Kimberley, Satow speaks with the Japanese Minister Kato Takaaki and his Secretary Ijuin on the 1st of June, and he's with Lord Kimberley again on the 28th of June. Kimberley, by the way, was the outgoing Foreign Secretary. He was soon to be replaced by Lord Salisbury, the Conservatives. Satow sails from Liverpool for New York on the 29th of June. He sails from Vancouver in the Empress of China on the 15th of July and arrives in Yokohama and is welcomed by many British subjects on the 28th of July. He calls on Saionji Kinmochi, acting Foreign Secretary, who speaks French, on the 29th. He calls on the American Minister Edwin Dunn on the 30th of July. Then he calls on the Prime Minister Ito Hirobumi on the 1st of August, the German Minister Felix von Gutschmidt, and the Belgian Minister Albert Daneton on the 8th of August. He has an audience with the Emperor and Empress Meiji on the 9th, and on the August 7th and 12th, he is in Yokohama. In August, he is also visited by the Vice President of the Privy Council, Higashi Kuze Michitomi, and Minister of the Imperial Household, Hijikata Hisamoto, on August the 10th, and also Yamagata Aritomo, Fukuba Bise, and others. He goes to Miyanoshita on the 16th to 18th of August, and he's at Nikko on the 20th to the 29th. And then on December 26th, he goes to Atami by train. On the 28th, he climbs Mount Higane, and he's with the boys, those are his sons, Eitaro and Hisayoshi, at Numazu from December the 30th to the 31st. So he simply refers to them as the boys. Here's some ministers in Japan in 1895. There's Mikhail Hitrovo of Russia, and then clockwise from the top left, Edwin Dunn, Jules Armand, Albert Daneton, and Heinrich Coudenhove-Kalergi of Austria. This is from the monthly, or sorry, the magazine at least, I don't know if it's monthly, Taiyo of Meiji 28, volume 1, number 2. Taiyo means sun. And then here are Baron Albert and Baroness Eleonora Mary Daneton. There's Albert and there's Mary. She was a member of the Haggard family. And Baron and Baroness Sannomiya Yoshitane, the master of ceremonies of the imperial household, and his wife Baroness Alathea was British. And these are from Baroness Daneton's book again. Okay, so now 1896, he has an audience with the Emperor and Empress on January the 1st. He goes to Atami, January the 2nd to 5th, and he's with Harold Parlett of the legation at Ushibuse from January 10th to 11th. He has dinner with the Navy Minister Saigo Tsugumichi on the 16th. He calls on Basil Hall Chamberlain and dines with Cambridge graduates, Kuroda Nagashige, Suematsu Kencho, and Kikuchi Dairoku and others on January the 24th. The Foreign Office approves J.C. Hall and Joseph Longford as consuls for Formosa, what we call Taiwan now, by telegram on January the 29th. He goes to the Foreign Minister Saionji on February the 3rd and to Ito on February the 8th. There's a call from the Korean Kwon Yong-chin, and he learns that the Korean king is in the Russian legation on February 13th. Asaina, his paid informant, tells Satow that 400 troops have been secretly sent to Korea, and Satow says it would be disastrous for Japan to go to war because the navy is not strong enough at this time, at least. And then Satow discusses Formosa, that's Taiwan, the adhesion of colonies to the 1894 Treaty of Commerce and Navigation with Ito on March the 2nd. This was the treaty by which extraterritoriality was abolished in 1899. It was a treaty signed in London between Lord Kimberley and I think it was Aoki Shuzo. Former First Lord of the Admiralty, Lord Spencer, visits from April 10th to the 17th, and Satow is in Kansai from April 29th to May the 2nd. Then he calls on the foreign minister, Mutsumune Mitsu. They talk about Korea. Mutsu is ill, so he calls on the Prime Minister Ito, and they discuss cables, the laying of cables, transatlantic and transpacific and what have you. They discuss Formosa, Korea, and Russia. Mutsu's illness, and also they also just mention Admiral Buller. He talks to Admiral Buller after lunch, and then Satow sees Mutsu about Korea on the 21st. Sir Andrew Noble of Armstrong's selling warships to Japan appears on May 23rd in the diary. These are all diary-based entries. And Viscount Fukuba Bise calls with fruit, a basket of fruit actually, and discusses Japanese adoption of Chinese civilization in the Nara period and Japanese failure to get Korea to adopt European civilization now. Satow says the Koreans are intelligent enough, but Inoue Kaoru has been in too great a hurry. Okay, here is a photograph, a group photograph. Earl Spencer's visiting Hamarikyu in Tokyo on the 13th of April, 1896. Satow is fourth from the left in the middle row. 1, 2, 3, 4. There he is, right here. Saigo is on his left, so that would be here. Saigo Tsugumichi. And then that's Earl Spencer here. Sannomiya is behind Spencer in the back row on his left, so that would be here. Okay. So that kind of wooden, what could you call it, landing stage or something, platform, it is over the water, is actually still there in the Hamarikyu Palace Park. And so that's actually a tea house behind them. Okay, so here is the second Matsukata cabinet, 18th of September 1896 to 12th of January 1898. So in the top row from the left, we have Saigo Tsugumichi, Matsukata Masayoshi, Prime Minister and Finance Minister, and Okuma Shigenobu, founder of Waseda University. In the middle row, we've got Nomura Yasushi, Kabayama Sukenori, Takashima Tomonosuke. And in the bottom row, we've got Kiyoura Keigo, Hachisuka Tochiaki, and Enomoto Takeaki. Okay. Again, this is from Taiyo. The cabinets change quite frequently in this period, so it's quite difficult to keep to be sure of who's in charge at a particular time. So continuing 1896, Satow sails in HMS Centurion to Kure and Moji coal depot, and he returns to Yokohama June the 6th to 16th, and then he goes to Lake Chuzenji, that's Nikko, by train on July the 1st, returning to Tokyo on the 4th. He calls on Ito, discusses Formosa, Taiwan, and Yamagata's visit to Moscow and Li Hung Chang on July the 13th. And he's at Chuzenji, Nikko, from the 15th to the 25th of July, and from the 31st of July to the 14th of August. In my separate video about Satow and Nikko, I note that I think I said he visits Nikko a total of 38 times in his life, and 31 of them are in this period when he builds a cottage at Nikko in 1896, yes. Satow calls on Foreign Minister Sayonji and discusses Japanese immigration to Australia and treaty adhesion, Formosa and Yamagata's mission to Moscow on the 17th of August. Comrade Jutaro calls to concede the point about artisans because they want adhesion of the main Australian colonies. This is quite detailed notes in the diaries about the negotiations. Satow and Albert Daneton go to Nikko, and there are floods on the way in September. And he gives Komura a memo about Formosan camphor on 23rd of September. Then he calls on the new pro-British Foreign Minister Okuma Shigenobu and discusses McCalmont's yacht, permission, I think, for a yacht to travel through the inland sea, adhesion of colonies to the treaty, secrecy of Japanese army towards the British military attaché Colonel Sartorius, Formosa, Jardine and Company's lot in Yokohama, harbor improvements at Yokohama and Kobe, Li Hung Chang and Korea. Quite a lot, really, to discuss. Satow calls on the new Prime Minister, Matsukata Masayoshi, on the 7th of October. Okuma complains strongly to Satow about Canadian and Australian attitudes to Japanese immigrants on the 15th of October. And the Meiji Emperor visits the horse races in Yokohama on the 29th. Satow visits Okuma to discuss the adhesion of colonies to the treaty, the 1894 treaty, Formosa treaty ratification, Yokohama port dredging, and so on, and military and naval preparations on the 5th of November, and the coming into operation of the new treaty, patents, railways, and colonies on the 14th. Matsukata talked about the army and navy expenditure, gold, military, and financial weakness of China, following the British example of India in governing Formosa. So Japan, this was Formosa, Taiwan was Japan's first colony. Okuma talks about Korean history and the murder of Queen Min. Satow calls on Okuma and they discuss trademarks, the Consular Convention, Siam, that's Thailand, and Manila on the 3rd of December. Ignatius Valentine Shirol of the Times visits Satow and reports about the situation in Korea on the 9th of December, and they discuss the Foreign Office attitudes to China over lunch on the 16th. And then Satow goes to Nikko with the Danetons and others for rest and recuperation, R&R, on the 26th to 28th of December. And then there's the funeral of the Choshu Prince, Mori Motonori, on the 30th of December. And as I said, all of this information is really from Satow's diaries. So it's the main source for this period. In 1897, January to May, well, first there's the usual reception at 2 p.m. So that would be with the Emperor and Empress on January the 1st. Satow calls on Okuma to discuss the Karoo trial, begun on October the 24th. Mrs. Karoo murdered her husband. Her husband was proprietor of the Yokohama United Club, I think it was. The Barry case, torture of the accused, extradition and the Siam Japan Treaty. He again goes to Okuma to discuss Barry and Japan's treaty with Turkey and Siam on the 14th of January. Judge H.S. Wilkinson calls to discuss the Karoo case on the 2nd of February. Satow goes to Okuma to discuss the Barry case, Japanese government finances and Korea on the 9th of February. And he goes to Okuma again to talk about Korea, opium in Taiwan, Formosa, and the colonies on the 18th of February. The Japan Honolulu cable and subsidy discussed with businessman T. Smith of London on the 19th of February. And Satow goes again to Okuma to discuss the colonies and the gold standard on the 4th of March. Silk direct export bounty, Formosa Chinese, sending a Japanese representative to Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee on the 18th of March. Consular Convention, Jubilee, Formosa, currency, the 1st of April, Convention, Jubilee, 7th of April. Military attaché at St. Petersburg. Lieutenant Colonel Waters calls and says the Siberian Railway will be completed in 1901. And Satow leaves Yokohama by the Empress of India for England via Canada on the 7th of May, going back for the Diamond Jubilee. And here he is at the Diamond Jubilee. Satow reaches England on the 4th of June. He calls on Kato, the Japanese minister, on the 5th, and he goes to the Foreign Office on the 8th of June. He attends the celebrations on the 22nd. He sees Prince Arisugawa Takehito off at Victoria Station on the 30th, goes again to the Foreign Office next day and to Osborne in the Isle of Wight to see Queen Victoria on the 11th of August, to the Foreign Office to see Lord Salisbury on the 6th of October, and Sanderson and Sir Francis Villiers on the 12th. And he calls on Kato on the 14th of October. He leaves England on the 20th of October. He's in Canada from the 29th of October to 8th of November and returns to Japan on the 21st of November. Very busy man. Nakada Takanori of the Foreign Office calls. Satow sees Komura to discuss Korea, Hawaii, Nagasaki harbor question. And they have a tough argument on the taxation of the Sendai high school teacher, W. Denning, on the 25th of November. He goes to Chuzenji for a short time in early December. Thomas Glover calls with banker, whoops, I've gone backwards. Sorry, I've gone forwards. Calls with the banker John Stiven on the 9th of December. Saigo Tsugumichi holds a party at Koyokwan on the 10th of December. The consul, Joseph Henry Longford, calls on the 13th. Satow calls on the new foreign minister, Nishi Tokujiro, and they discuss sealing, that's seal hunting, the German occupation of Kyoto, Korea, Camphor, and Hawaii on the 16th of December. Port Arthur and the Parliament, the Diet's hostility to the cabinet on the 23rd of December. Viscount Yamao Yozo calls on behalf of Prince Arisugawa on Christmas Day. Satow calls on Ito and tells him party government must come in soon. He said Matsukata's cabinet had made a great mess of things he had left in good order. He clearly does not wish to undertake government. I think that's wish to, I can't quite read it there. We talked about China on the 30th of December. Okay, we move on. Here's the third Ito cabinet from 12th of January to the 6th of June, 1898, with Ito in the center. And then clockwise from the top left, we've got Saigo Tsugumichi, younger brother of Saigo Takamori, Inoue Kaoru, Yoshikawa Akimasa, Nishi Tokujiro, Ito Myoji, Suematsu Kencho, Katsura Taro, and Saionji Kimmochi. all of these are very famous people in Meiji Japan. And then in 1898, first of all, there's a family dinner at Totsukamura, where Satow has a house for his common-law wife and sons. Satow discusses the mourning for the Empress Dowager with the Master of Court Ceremonies, Sannomiya Yoshitane and Nishi, on the 6th of January. A mining engineer named Russell Dunn calls to talk about Vladivostok coal on the 8th of January. Satow calls on Ito to congratulate him on forming his third cabinet on the 13th of January. At dinner, Hijikata mentions talk of an Anglo-Japanese alliance, but Satow speaks only of a close understanding being a good thing to publicize, to make public. Satow speaks to the foreign minister Nishi on the 20th and 27th of January. Sannomiya calls to say the Empress is pleased that court mourning will be worn in England for the sovereign of Japan on the 1st of February. Satow calls on Ito and discusses Russian troops at Kirin, Korea, and Kyoto and Kobe Hill lots, Australia and the treaty, Canada and Li Hung Chang. Well, all of these different issues he discusses. Okay. Satow sees Nishi and discusses the Kobe Hill lots. It's a matter of ownership and what will happen when extraterritoriality comes into force. I think it was about whether they could be owned in, the hill lots could be owned in perpetuity or just limited to 25 years. And those other issues, including the Chinese indemnity to Japan for the Sino-Japanese War, the first one of 1894-5, and the legal codes. This would be in connection with extraterritoriality. Then Satow goes to Ito to discuss the indemnity and partition of China, coolie violence in Kobe, and codes. This is legal codes, I think, in Taiwan, Formosa. He goes to Nishi Tokujiro about limits on the Kobe Hill lots leases and Chinese indemnity loan, the rudeness of the lower classes on the 3rd of March. To Ito and Nishi to ask if Japan is willing for Britain to succeed her at Weihai Wei. And he's told that Japan will go when China pays the indemnity. That happens on the 16th of March. Satow thanks Ito for the favorable answer received through Nishi, and he makes and takes a note verbal to Ito and then Komura about Weihai Wei on the 1st of April. So Britain did actually take over Weihai Wei and kept it for many years after Japan. So Japan would have received it during the, or taken possession of it, I suppose, during the Sino-Japanese War of 1894-5. Satow calls on the finance minister Inoue Kaoru, who says Japan doesn't want to support Britain taking Weihai Wei openly for fear of upsetting the three powers, that's France, Germany, and Russia. He predicts a great struggle in 5 years, which actually, yes, it happened, the Russo-Japanese War was 1904-5, so it's almost right. To Ito, Satow goes to Ito to discuss the Kobe Hill lots and Weihai Wei. Satow gets Komura to promise to let him know the exact date of evacuation of Weihai Wei on the 4th of May. And Komura calls to announce the indemnity is fully paid and evacuation will happen by the end of the month. Satow is delighted, congratulates him and Ito on the Nishi-Rosen protocol, and says British interests in Korea are only commercial and secondary to those of Japan and Russia, as he always tells Koreans who visit him. He says this on the 10th of May. And continuing with 1898, Satow takes his German cousin Lysinka to Nikko from the 13th to the 16th of May. The Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, Komura, says the evacuation of Weihai Wei will end on the 23rd of May, and Japan has no objection to a British warship going there. Satow talks with Ito about treatment of foreigners after the new treaties come into operation, and Lord Salisbury's speech on the 20th or 21st mentioning Japan as a country with which we have so many grounds of sympathy and cooperation. Satow asks a reticent Nishi about Salisbury's speech on the 26th of May. Nishi was a French speaker and Russian, pro-Russian, I think. But he was the foreign minister at this time. Satow calls on Comra and discusses income tax law, prisons and bail. He discusses Manila, Austrian treaty ratification, and Nagasaki harbor with Nishi on the 23rd of June. He calls on Ito, who talks of cabinet reshuffles, retirement, making his own party and resigning his ranks and decorations on the 27th of June. He calls on the new Prime Minister Okuma, who is cheerful about the future of constitutional government and mentions the Austrian treaty ratification on the 2nd of July. He discusses violent coolies in Kobe, treaties, Formosa, and prisons on the 9th of July, and China on the 27th. So Satow is at Chuzenji Nikko from the 29th of July to the 4th of August, taking a break. And then he calls on Okuma by appointment to discuss the Philippines, taxation, diet, coolie violence, the tariff on the 17th of August. Again at Chuzenji from the 20th of August to the 2nd of September. Then he goes to Okuma to discuss Russian Hague Peace Conference proposal, tariffs in Formosa, Ito's visit to China, prisons, Kobe Hill lots on the 22nd of September. And Okuma talked a great deal about China, the Philippines, and Korea on the 6th of October. Satow is at Atami from the 9th to the 29th of October. He calls on Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs Hatoyama Kazuo and discusses Japanese going to Queensland, berthing ships at Yokohama, the Kobe Hill lots, and the warehouses at Kobe on the 2nd of November. And Satow attends Aoki Shuzo's first reception as foreign minister on the 10th of November and calls on Aoki, who is pro-British and anxious to work with England, on the 17th of November. He was also, it has to be said, pro-German. I think his wife was German. They discuss consular jurisdiction, consular convention, Anglo-Russian relations at Peking, railway construction in China on the 7th of December. And Satow is at the unveiling of Saigo Takamori's statue in Ueno Park on the 18th of December. That statue, of course, is still there. Okay, here's the second Yamagata cabinet from 8th of November 1898 to 19th of October 1900, with Yamagata Aritomo in the center. Clockwise from the top left, Matsukata, Masayoshi, Saigo, Tsugumichi, Kabayama Sukenori, Yoshikawa Akimasa, Sone Arasuke, Yamamoto Gombe, Kyoura Keigo, Aoki Shuzo, and Katsura Taro. So 1899, which is the Meiji 32nd year of Emperor Meiji's reign. Asaina calls to talk about changes in the government on the 4th of January. Satow speaks at a dinner with Aoki about docking HMS Victorious at Kure near Hiroshima, naval base, and coal for Royal Navy ships at Nagasaki and the Pacific Cable on the 8th of January. He speaks to Yamagata about the treatment of prisoners and Aoki, who is concerned about encouraging foreign investors, on the 12th of January. Lord Charles Beresford arrives on the 17th, and he's presented by Satow to Emperor Meiji on the 23rd of January. Satow goes to Aoki and they discuss Nagasaki coal, pending cases, consular convention, duties on colonial products, trademarks, certificates of origin, Indian adhesion to the treaty, deserters, Chinese army, etc. on the 19th of January. Asaina says there's no hope of foreigners being allowed to hold land on the 2nd of February. That's his private informant, his paid informant. Satow dines with the army minister, Katsura Taro. They discuss Chinese army and training for officers, and Katsura says Britain and Japan have parallel interests. Satow discusses the Chinese army training with Aoki on the 14th of February. Satow speaks to Ito about China and Russian designs on Manchuria and keeping China intact, with which Ito agrees. Satow says he is pleased with various bills to facilitate the transfer of jurisdiction on the 15th of February. Satow offers Aoki the Yokohama consular prison for foreigners the next day. Satow gives Aoki a note verbal about consular income tax, and they discuss India, the Chinese army, the Amoy concession, Italian actions in Sanmun on the 16th of March. They also discuss operation of treaties, foreigners owning land, consulate preliminary examination of arrested foreigners on the 23rd of March, and Russia in Korea, tenders for railways, and revised treaty with India on the 30th of March. Aoki gives Satow a note verbal about income tax on Her Majesty's consuls, and they discuss India, pending cases at transfer of jurisdiction, Russia and China on the 6th of April, Indian adhesion to the Treaty of 1894, Japan joining the Madrid Agreement of 1891 on industrial patents, pending cases, and China on the 20th of April. That's pending cases in British courts, which of course would not have jurisdiction after the 16th of July 1899, when extraterritoriality would end. So it's how to deal with those cases. And they speak on various matters on May the 1st and 18th. Just continuing 1899, Satow calls on Aoki to discuss the date of the operation of treaty, i.e. the 17th of July or 4th of August. In fact, for British people, it was the 17th of July. I think French and German were the 4th of August. Execution of criminal and civil judgments, land registration in settlements, Yokohama consular prison, Queensland immigration, Indian adhesion to the consular convention. He also discusses the Hyogo hotel lot, consular convention, British Columbia, Queensland, date of operation of the treaty, and Japanese prostitutes abroad on the 8th of June. The date of operation of the treaty in Kobe settlement, the Queensland and Canada welcoming Japanese merchants and travelers, but not laborers, on the 22nd of June. Consular jail, Chinese confidential mission, taxes on diplomats, registration fees on land, transfers, passports of foreigners, pending cases, land registers, etc. 20th, 24th, and 31st of July. And Satow calls on the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, that's Takahira Kogoro, and asks if foreign warships can visit the 22 newly opened ports on the 1st of September. He calls on Aoki and talks about registration fees, British jurisdiction disputed in Raynell's case, discrimination against Europeans in Formosa, Taiwan, regarding leasing land and opening ports, Chinese treaty negotiations on the 7th of September. And Aoki calls on Satow to show Hong Kong Bank proposal for Chinese mint, discuss the draft consular convention, Indian adhesion and settlement land on the 13th of September. Satow receives a telegram that his mother has died on the 10th of September. This he receives on the 13th. He boards Admiral Seymour's flagship, HMS Centurion, for Kobe, Shikoku, Miyajima, Moji, and back on 15th to 25th of September. I think Seymour had gone up to Nikko and spent time at Satow's cottage there, and this was no doubt Seymour repaying the hospitality. With Aoki, Satow discusses the Chinese mint proposal, railway tenders, ginseng smuggling by Japanese in Korea, land leases in settlements, Japanese officer to Indian maneuvers, etc. The haute politique settlement land of the 5th of October, on the 5th of October, Nishi's appointment as minister to Peking and Russians at Masampo, that's the southern part of Korean peninsula, on the 12th of October, Kojedo and the Russians, the Yokohama consular jail not accepted by the Japanese government to Satow's regret, the Indian consular convention settlement, land and tea duty. Probably should be India, not Indian. Settlement land on the 8th of November. Again, India and Formosan leases, Yokohama land, Russia and Japan on the 30th of November. Cables, settlement land, ambassadors to London, Washington, Berlin, Paris, and St. Petersburg on the 6th of December. And Satow tells Ito he was pleased to read his speeches on the theory of the emperor and treating foreigners liberally. And he writes in his diary that Ito is clearly the power behind the throne. He writes this on the 28th of December. So we're now on to 1900, which is Satow's last year serving in Japan. So he sees Aoki and they discuss Formosan land, title deeds, Masampo and Petersburg. On the 11th of January, the Hyogo Hotel land claim, or the Bardens claim, Russian Navy and Kojedo on the 18th. He discusses the likelihood of war between Japan and Russia with the military attaché Churchill on the 24th of January. Discusses China, Masampo and Rosen's recall and land question with Ito at Atami on the 30th. Satow and Aoki discuss Hayashi's appointment as minister to London, Pacific Cable, title deeds, consular convention, consular marriages, Indian protocol, and exchange of notes on the 9th of February. Indian adhesion is still with the cabinet, who disliked the terms, the 22nd of February. The buildup of Russian troops in the Far East on the 1st of March, the Madrid Agreement of 1891 and Japan's refusal to adhere. Russian ships at Masampo and Pacific Cables on the 22nd of March. The Russian demand of land at Masampo, consular convention and Japanese court recognizing Longford at Nagasaki and India on the 29th of March. And Satow receives a telegram from Lord Salisbury offering him the post at Peking, Minister at Peking. And William Henry Stone comes to talk about cables on the 29th of March. He's an engineer. Again, 1900 continued. Okuma Shigenobu calls and says there's no trouble about Masampo, but Japanese people, army and navy would not allow the government to let Korea fall into Russian hands. That's the 4th of April. And of course, the Russo-Japanese War was really about that. Satow and Aoki talk about allowing HMS Barfleur under Admiral Bruce, commanded by Admiral Bruce, inside the Yokohama breakwater, and also Masampo on the 5th of April. Refusal of breakwater access to the Barfleur and consular convention, and India, the continued objections of the Hosei Kyoku, the legislation bureau. Masampo also on the 12th and 25th of April. Satow goes to say goodbye to Ito, who says he hopes Satow is coming back on the 2nd of May. Sannomiya also hopes Satow is coming back, but Satow says he can't say for certain on May the 3rd, and he sails from Yokohama in the Empress of India steamship on May the 4th. And this is a portrait of Satow in the Illustrated London News, 29th of September 1900, with the heading, "The Crisis in China." Okay, not much left to go now. While he was minister in China from 1900 to 1906, Satow observed the events in Japan, and especially he observed the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 5, which was fought on Chinese soil, and the Treaty of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which was the conclusion of the war. He wrote to his friend Frederick Victor Dickens that Japan could not expect an indemnity at Portsmouth because no Russian territory had been occupied. This was the general opinion in Peking. And that's in a letter to Dickens on the 6th of December, dated 6th of December 1905. And PRO 3033 11.6 is the reference in the Satow papers in the National Archives of the UK. Okay, 1906, Meiji 39, Satow returned briefly to Japan from the 16th of May to 9th of June on his way home to retire in England in 1906 to see his family and old friends and acquaintances. He went to Kyoto, called on Okuma, had an audience with Emperor Meiji. He visited Okane, Takeda Kane-san, at Fujimicho, the house that he'd arranged for her and the family. He dined with the Cambridge Club. He went to Lake Chuzenji, Nikko, from the 1st to 5th of June. He dined at Arisugawa's and spoke there over cigars with Claude MacDonald, the newly made ambassador. That's a mistake. He didn't become an ambassador until, oh yes, he did. Yes, sorry, no, that's right, because he became ambassador in 1905 and this is 1906. Mutual upgrading of relations occurred between Japan and Britain in 1905, and so the top diplomat in each case became ambassador where they had been minister before. Okay, I think conclusions. Whoops, sorry. So just broad conclusions. Satow's life in the 1870s was much freer and less work-oriented than during the Bakumatsu period or his later time as minister, and he did much traveling in Japan and Europe at a time when railway networks were barely developed. The 1895 to 1900 diary indicates that he was very busy with many appointments each day, though he did keep a separate diary for his trips to Lake Chuzenji for rest and recuperation. I'm afraid that this URL no longer is no longer, it's dead. It doesn't exist anymore, that page. Although I do have a separate Satow page on wix.com, which I am updating still. Thank you for listening. And in fact, here is my webpage, which I am updating about Satow. So the URL is right here, ianruxton.wixsite.com/Ernest Satow. And I've got lots of links here, including a very recent one about my lecture, which I gave on October 19th. So this is actually a link to YouTube, where I have uploaded this particular lecture. And actually, where it says Scholar Diplomat, there's the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography entry about Satow, and so on and so forth. There's lots of stuff here. I do urge you to take a look at it if you're interested in Satow. And I will continue to update it. Oh, that's a bit too large. Okay. Thank you very much indeed for listening.